U luistert naar Beit Ahavat Torah, het internetkanaal van Robert Veen voor de studie van Tenach en de rabbijnse traditie.
Hi there, I hope you're doing well in your studies and in your life. This is the second installment of the third lecture in our series on biblical theology, Genesis 1 to 11, we are studying right now. We have dealt with the offerings of Cain and Abel. We briefly touched upon the analysis of the first murder, the anatomy of murder, I called it. And now we need to continue with the line, the descendants of Cain and Abel. Now, when we look at the descendants of Cain and Abel, two things are very important. First of all, we find in the text the gradually degrading effects of sin among those who have departed from God, who have taken their lives in their own hands and do not take God to account. And then there is one particular passage that shows these increasing worsening of sin in the life of humanity. Let's first of all take a look at that. Okay, here we have Cain, who is exiled, who has to go to the land of Nod, which is an interesting name because Nod means wandering. So he doesn't really dwell somewhere, but he is, even if he stays in one particular place, he is still a wanderer, a fugitive in his mind, in his spiritual condition. It's to the east of Eden, so it moves away from the Garden of Eden in the direction of east, and you will find in Genesis that sinful people will always try to move east in the idea that they are closer to the place where the sun comes up. So they are worshipping already a little bit the sun. To be close to where the sun comes up is the idea, and also geographically it's necessary because the Garden of Eden probably was located near to the sea, and so going east meant going in the direction of Babel, of the origin of the Euphrates and the Tigris. So moving away from the land of Israel in that sense. To the west, Israel, Gan Eden, and then to the right, we have the eastern area where the sun comes up, and people go there. And Cain, the line of Cain, the descendants of Cain go there, and ultimately they built the city of Babel at the end of these two rivers, the Euphrates and the Tigris. It's to the east of Eden. Now, Cain is, despite his status as a murderer, he is able to have offspring. His wife bears Enoch. Where does his wife come from? Obviously, this allows us to understand it all as a mythical narrative. That is to say, the author doesn't bother with the idea that the only woman that Cain could marry was his sister. He doesn't bother with that. Cain is a separate story, a mythical story. So he's found a wife. He builds a city, that's the first thing, and he names it after his son, which is significant because every time that a father calls the name of the city that he has grounded with the name of his son, something weird is going on. Take a look at the story of Sichem and Hamor. Sichem is the father. Hamor is the father. He grounds the city. He calls it Sichem after his son, but that is a rapist, the first recorded rapist in the book of Genesis. And It's not just anybody that he rapes. He rapes the daughter of Jacob called Dinah, and Dinah means justice. So we have a story here laden with all kinds of symbolic meanings. Okay, so we have the um, generations of Cain. Um, Enoch is his son, Irad is the firstborn son, Mehujael, Methusael, and Lamech. And now Lamech is singled out to show us this um, enormous degradation of sin in the line of the sons, the descendants of Cain. Verse 19, first of all, Lamech took unto him two wives. That's directly in contradiction to the commandments in Genesis, or let's say the order of creation. Adam was supposed to have one wife. Man is supposed to have one wife. Obviously, in the stories of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, God allows the patriarchs to have several women because of the differing social conditions. But Lamech here is considered to be a sinner precisely because he has two wives. Importantly, also, if you have two wives, is the idea that you cannot look upon them as your partners. You have to look upon them as your possessions. Lamech takes two wives. Um, the descendants of this Lamech, Jabal, Jubal, Tubal, Cain, they bring ambiguity in human culture because, on the one hand, they are the father of the nomads, people who have cattle and have to move with their cattle from one place to another. We have Jubal, who is able to make musical instruments. So here the culture is enriched by music, but also Tubal Cain, an instructor of every artificer in brass and iron. So he was the one able to create musical instruments like trumpets and the like, but he's also able to make weapons of brass and iron. And then you see in verse 23 this degradation of sin, because what is Lamech saying here? Lamech is here defending the doctrine of revenge. Hearken unto my speech. His wives are his audience. He's bragging about himself. I have slain a man to my wounding. That someone has wounded Lamech. So there must have been quarrels and conflicts. But Lamech takes it upon himself to kill anyone who even wounds him. He even kills young people who are way weaker than he himself, just because he hurts, weil mich geschlagen hat. Um, so there is this principle of revenge way beyond the revenge that God had put on Cain. If anyone slays Cain, it would be there would be retribution sevenfold, but here 70 and sevenfold. So he's increasing this idea, the beneficial idea, this preventive measure that God gives with Cain. So don't kill Cain because there will be punishment for it, and it will be sevenfold, but Lamech increases that to 70 and sevenfold. So even the slightest harm done to him will be revenged in this enormous manner. But then we have in verse 25 the introduction of the second line of generations. Um, Seth, the one who has been inserted into history to take the place of Abel. For God hath appointed me another seed instead of Abel. This instead of Abel is expressed in the name Seth. And in Seth we have the beginning of religion. To Seth, to him also there was born a son, and he called his name Enos. Then began man to call upon the name of the Lord. So we have to understand that there would be an altar, there would be offerings and sacrifices, and there would be prayer. So we have these two lines: Seth, a new son of Adam, and we have the line of Cain, which is represented here beautifully by the person of Lamech. Two lines of generations, two um, typical ways for humanity to exist. Now, the nature of this degradation we have already found because we have looked at Genesis 6, verse 5. God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And opposite that, we have Noah, who found grace in the eyes of the Lord. So Noah is the only one left within this increasing number of people that is like Abel, is a righteous person, is um, from the line of Seth. And to be of the line of Seth also means to be of the line of Eve, the woman, of which it is said that the seed of the woman would crush the head of the snake being the representation of this evil line of generations of mankind. Okay, now it's a very forceful statement that we have here in 6 verse 5. It shows the inner nature now of evil. Evil comes from the heart. The heart is the seat of volition, of desire, not just of the emotions. The emotions are there, but it's not an emotional expression, not an expression for the seat of emotions so much, because there are thoughts in the heart. The heart considers what it needs to do, it considers whether or not to obey a commandment or to respect a prohibition. And it's continuously evil. So this means that the inner nature of man has totally been corrupted. Not all men, because Noah is the exception here. So we can't see in Genesis 6, verse 5, an affirmation of the doctrine of complete sinfulness of the human nature. That's not what it says. And we have to read Genesis 6 on its own merits, by looking at what it says and not what we can say about it from, let's say, other parts of the Bible or from the New Testament. Here, indeed, every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continuously. Only evil, continuously. And there were the thoughts and the imaginations in the heart of man. So he was considering evil, he was doing evil already in his heart, he was making decisions that were evil. Uh, and evil here, Ra, doesn't only mean crimes that require punishment. It's also, let's say, um, to have a focus on um, your own life or your own survival, instead of taking care of others, or taking care of others only with the aim to further your own interest. Ra in the Hebrew here, evil, means a lot of things. It's a total corruption of the heart in every way that man was operating. Um, Sin centers in the heart. Human depravity had gone to the depths that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continuously. That's a terrible judgment on man's degradation in sin. Now, the nature of sin became clear in the life of Cain. It showed itself in the anger and the jealousy, his refusal to master sin, his refusal to go away from this threshold, and all of that led to murder as the outworking, the outcome of his hatred. Sin's nature becomes more evident even in his lack of repentance and his lack of faith toward God. He doesn't ask for um, uh, atonement, for forgiveness. He merely says, well, the punishment is too great to bear, and God then has to exile him, even showing him grace. And God gives him the mark of Cain, which indicates that you shouldn't touch Cain. I mean, the idea that there can be a murder will shake up the whole of the society around it. If somebody has murdered in your town, if there is a murder in your town or village, you are aware of the fact that there is a possibility of violent death in your town or village. So everyone starts trying to protect himself or herself from others, there will be a kind of suspiciousness hanging around everyone. So it changes society forever. And that's what happened when, in the imagination of the author, when the first man um, uh, murdered someone. Then we have again the punishment. The earth also was corrupt before God, and the earth was filled with violence. Now, the line of Seth shows a different picture. The Cain line is left incomplete. You can see that in the chapter that we had before. Let's take a look at it again. So we go back to chapter 4. You see that you have there the Toledot of Cain, and it ends somewhere. It ends here with Lamech, and then we have the beginning of the line of Seth. Um, so in Noah, this line of Seth was preserved. It continues beyond the flood. There's a new beginning. God makes a new beginning. There's a continuous genealogy of the line of Seth, of the descendants of Seth. And that is the line of descent that ultimately, through Sem, will lead to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And there were great promises given to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And if you compare that with other genealogies, you will see that the genealogies of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob have a forward-looking tendency. They look forward um, to an eschatology, to a final consummation of history, where the seed of the woman would ultimately deal a crushing blow on the head of the serpent. And as Christians, we think that it's happened in the life and death of Jesus Christ. And if you're a Jew, you will consider that when the Messiah comes, that will happen. Okay, now we already talked about this statement in Genesis 4 that people started to call upon the name of the Lord. It's the beginning of the worship of the Lord. One of the reasons for the perpetuation of this line of Seth is exactly this, that the worship of the Lord is a characteristic of this line of people. Among the descendants of Seth were those who called upon the name of the Lord. They involved themselves in the worship of their Creator. It would account for the faith and life of Enoch, who walked with God, and that is something that we see in the next chapter, in Genesis 5, where we see the line of Adam. Adam, Seth is mentioned, Enos is mentioned, Canaan, Mahalalel, etc., etc., etc. And then we finally come to Noah. Lamech, so not the Lamech of Cain, but the other Lamech, is the father of Noah. And Noah is a very special name. Actually, in Hebrew, it's not Noah, but Noach. Noach. That comes from a verb that means to rest. So this same shall comfort us concerning our work and toil of our hands, because of the ground which the Lord hath cursed. So Noah is the new beginning. And all of mankind then comes from these three sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japhet. So the Semites, we call them Semites, we lose the J sound, we don't say Shem, but Sem. The Semites, let's say the Arabic and Jewish people are part of that. The Hamites, that is everyone in Africa and Asia, and Japhet is Europe. That's a very brief account of it. Obviously, there are a lot of arguments needed to prove this, but I can't go into that now. But it says something interesting about Enoch. And that is verse 24. Enoch walked with God and he was not, for God took him, which can mean, as I explained in another video, that his death was a mystery to everyone. His body was never found. God took him away, so he died. Or Enoch is the oldest man alive because he was taken up into heaven without dying, because he walked with God, which is now an expression for piety and righteousness. Um, the manner of life that he had pleased God. His walking with God was a continuation of the close fellowship found between man and God in the Garden of Eden. So Enoch walked with God. Even in the midst of this very sinful humanity, people were able to live just like the Creator had intended them to do. Enoch is one example of that. And he is even more righteous, I believe, than Noah, who is called righteous in his generation, something that we will find in later chapters. Now, the Garden of Eden was now closed to man's access. God had put angels there to prevent people from returning to Gan Eden. But um, this man, this Enoch, uh, experienced a similar fellowship in his walk with God. It was a walk that did not terminate, for God took him. So that's one of the interpretations. He did not experience physical death. Now, the naming of Noah is interesting. His father Lamech said, "Out of the ground which the Lord has cursed, this one shall bring us relief from our work and from the toil of our hands." Verse 29. Um, it's based on a deep-seated realization of the effects of sin upon the human race. So Genesis 6, verse 11 and 12 give a description of the nature of that sin. In Genesis 6, this is not Genesis 6, obviously. Um, we have to go there for a moment. Genesis 6, verse 11 and 12. The earth also was corrupt before God, and the earth was filled with violence. And God looked upon the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted his way upon the earth. So God saw the earth and it was corrupt. It's a picture of the state of affairs that is quite bleak and somber. One other thing that we need to talk about is what it says in Genesis 6, 1 to 4, where you see the mingling of the two lines. The sons of God, I believe, are those in the line of Seth, and the daughters of men are those in the line. Sorry, the sons of God are the people in the line of Cain, and the daughters of men are in the line of Seth. Now, some people will say the sons of God must be angels. The daughters of men are simply the daughters of all mankind. But I don't believe that is necessary to explain it like this. It means, however, that humanity was being taken over by those who were in the line of Cain. So you had these two lines, but one of them was about to become extinct because of the activity of the others. Because what happens when they mingle, um, they give rise to the existence of the so-called Nephilim. The same became mighty men, which were of old, men of renown. So this mingling of, um, let's say, women who were uh, good women, good in the moral sense, and these people whose every thought, every imagination of the thoughts of their heart were continuously evil, led to people who were quite mighty and strong. Um, not, I think, giants. Giants is the translation that you need if you consider the angels to be their fathers. But I think the reason that's wrong, giants is wrong, we have to simply say that the Nephilim are great and powerful men. Um, so the Nephilim are great and powerful men. Um, There are no pagan influences in the Bible, so the terms used should be understood in the context of God's people and the line of descendants. The words, the expressions, the ideas do not come from paganism. So the marriage of the sons of God with the daughters of men is an intermarriage between the godly line and the ungodly line. Um, the manner in which the final author of the book of Genesis presents the line of Cain and the line of Seth prepares the reader for the possibility of this mixture of both, and that is the reason of verse 3. So, because the line of the godly, the line of Abel, the line of Seth, is threatened by these violent men, they take for themselves wives, so they actually forcefully take them. I think that is what it means here, although in general the expression to take a wife means to marry someone. It doesn't really imply violence, but it says of all which they chose, and that's something else. They didn't bother to ask the fathers. Um, so here, "Vayikchu lehem nashim mikol asher bacharu," they just take them. "Vayikchu" from lakach means to take. Could be that they took for wives. They took them for wives, which is marriage. But mikol asher bacharu means they simply decided, I want to marry this woman, and she had no say in it, and her parents had no say in it, and that's why it is a violent affair. But the result is verse 3, and the Lord said, "My spirit shall not always strive with man, for that he is also flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years," which is either that there is a new limitation on the length of someone's life. It's 120 years and no more. But the second option is that after 120 years, the flood will come. There is a condemnation of the world to destruction. To destruction. Um, Take a look at verse 4, where the passage here is resumed. The idea here is resumed. But note here that the response of the Lord implies that this is about a reality that happened, something that happened with humanity, and not something that happened with the angels and humanity. And the giants are therefore um, just evil men, which corresponds with verse 5. And God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and we have read that already. Okay, so the next time we need to take a look, further look at Noah. What is the whole idea of the ark, and what is Noah doing here? Um, what is the meaning of the flood as the first destruction of the world? So we have to take a look at that, and then we are almost at chapter 11 next time. Okay. So, what have we learned today? We have learned that these lines of the descendants of Seth and Cain, they form the first part of human history. They are at an equilibrium at first, but then something changes. The descendants of Cain take the upper hand because they simply rob the women. They are, uh, let's say, becoming larger and larger in numbers, because just like Lamech, they can take many wives and they steal those wives. So the line of Seth is becoming a minority more and more, until eventually only Noah and his sons are left. Only Noah is a righteous man in his generation among all these human beings. We have seen that the sinfulness of man is progressive. And it reaches a point where God says, well, this idea that the line of Seth will conquer the line of Cain, so that pious people, good people, will be in the majority, and they will ultimately fulfill the promise that the seed of the woman will crush the head of the snake. That won't happen like this. So I have to make a new start. And he makes that new start with Noah and his sons. There's a sort of recreation. Noah is tending a garden, he has a vineyard, and he starts humanity all over again. We're going to talk about that more in detail next time. This is it for now. Thank you very much for watching. Hope you're doing well in your studies, and see you soon.
Dank voor het luisteren naar Beit Ahavat Torah. Graag tot ziens.